Hi, Jonathan Hetterly here, and today on Psych Cinema we're going to be exploring the psychology in the hit film Bohemian Rhapsody. Psych Cinema is Shrink Tank's video series where I explore the psychology found in the films that I watch and love, or in this case, films I hate. But before we get started, do me a favor. Subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out anytime we drop new content that explores the intersection of pop culture and psychology. Now today is a unique video because I've really avoided talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, but given its commercial success and in some ways its critical acclaim, at least on the awards circuit, now that it is up for several prominent Oscar awards, I felt I really needed to address why I did not like this film, and not even just going piece by piece of what I found to be off-putting about the film, but maybe talk about the psychology behind maybe why I didn't like the film while other people did. Now, if you go on shrinktank.com, you will actually find an article last year where I basically broke down and eviscerated the film 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. A film that I hated. I absolutely hated, but a lot of critics and people found to be a great film. I'm not going to do that today because in some ways Bohemian Rhapsody hasn't been lauded in the same way that 3 Billboards was last year. But it has been a commercial success and it is up for a lot of awards, and I am dumbfounded by it. I found this film to be poorly acted, poorly paced. I thought the screenplay and the writing was very thin, very superficial. And I didn't know a lot about Freddie Mercury and Queen before going to this film, but I knew enough to have some anticipation and hope of what the film might address. And I left the film not knowing anything new or substantial about Freddie Mercury or Queen, except there was a gay lover that really almost destroyed the band, which I found to be, of all things that they focused on, that to be the most trite and off-putting. And yet this movie has made hundreds of millions of dollars. It is up for awards. Rami Malek is one of the favorites to win the Best Actor award. And in some ways I found his performance to be more of a mimicking rather than an actual performance. And I don't know if that's really his fault so much of the writing and the scenes that they gave him, where it's so quick-paced and it jumps around so much that it gives very little time for the characters and the performances to breathe. And so this got me thinking, like, why did I respond so poorly to this film? And so I want to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the psychological reasons behind it. And this is going to really kind of integrate with film criticism, my own personal film criticism, and the psychology behind why do I think that this movie was so, I was so cold for it. And it really has to do with 3 kind of key components in psychology. Contrast, dichotomy, and cognitive dissonance. And really what all of those oftentimes look at or convey is this idea when there are thoughts, beliefs, emotions that are either competing or in contrast with other thoughts and beliefs, and you're trying to reconcile things that have tension. And so one of the things that really this film had tension with me was understanding that Freddie Mercury was a very charismatic, very outgoing person and persona, and we see that in his performances. We see that just with the musicality of Queen's repertoire, and yet we know that his backstory, his personal story, there is actually a lot of there's a lot of things that of more tension, of more struggle, and I was hoping that this movie would tap into some of that a little bit more than it did. So in terms of anticipation, I was hoping that there would be less of the outgoing, gregarious, sort of showman-y side of Freddie Mercury, which we all know already, and humanize him a little bit more than maybe his stage persona. And I don't think that this film did, or at least to the degree that left me satisfied. And again, that kind of goes back to pacing. I felt like it was very quick, that it would spend a little bit time with his family, spend a little bit time in his marriage, and then just quickly go back to making music. In a lot of ways, that's one of the fundamental faults of the construction of this movie. I did not see it as a film that wove in important music into the narrative. I found this movie basically designed itself around the Queen's songs itself. And with that, it doesn't feel that organic. It really more was a, hey, this is one of their famous songs. I wonder how they created that song. And before you know it, boom, you get a scene where the origins of a particular song are explained to the audience, and then it moves straight into a live performance of that song for the audience. And so this is really a bunch of music videos or origins of songs kind of compilation than it is a biography or an exploration of Freddie Mercury and his relationship with his band members and Queen. Because in a lot of ways, that's really about the challenge of making a music biopic or biopic. It's in some ways, there is sort of a structure behind musical biographies or even musicals in film. And oftentimes it's the origin story, the rise to fame, the vanity, the hubris that almost leads to their downfall, and then the reconciliation, which leads to the film ending on a high point. And in some ways, we know that that's not really Freddie Mercury's story or the story of Queen. By the time Freddie Mercury died from complications related to AIDS, Queen was not really at the prominence of their music reputation or output. Their glory days were long faded. We don't get any of that story. It really ends at the Live Aid performance, which is a great scene. It's the one redeeming part of this film. And yet, we also know that you can watch the actual Live Aid, concert on YouTube itself. So, does that really justify the other hour and a half leading up to the last 15-20-minute performance that crescendos the film? But when you have a musical or a musical biopic, it tends to follow those basic beats. If you think back to the biopic Ray, starring Jamie Foxx, or if you think Walk the Line, that starred Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon, they tend to follow that same formula. So why did I love those films more than I love Bohemian Rhapsody? And again, I did. It's because I didn't get to know Freddie Mercury. I didn't get to know his story. In some ways, this was a behind the music VH1 TV episode, but instead of an hour, it was 2 hours, and then they could just add more and more songs. But then this really goes back to this idea of cognitive dissonance, or contrast, or dichotomy, because in some ways, Queen's music is fun. Queen's music is upbeat. It's energetic. And so as you create a film around Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, We Will Rock You, or Another One Bites the Dust, it's really hard to create quiet or even somber scenes and character study only to jump back into a musical note or a musical piece that's very upbeat. It's got a strong bass line, makes you want to dance and move or sing out loud, which the audience that I was watching this film with, several people were doing that at different moments. So this film in some ways may have been cursed from the very beginning. How do you make a film about Queen and upbeat music and at the same time try to discuss some of the darker or seedy undersides of Freddie Mercury's life and family life and struggle and sexuality and elements like that? Because people just, they adore Queen's music and they hold it in a nostalgic spot where it's really warm and it takes them back to a time of innocence and fun. And in a lot of ways, I feel like the audience and the filmmakers didn't want to kind of be a party pooper with that. But in the end, it really creates a dissatisfying film experience. So even if people, and this is what I've heard a lot of people that champion the film, it's fun. They had a lot of fun watching it. And I don't begrudge anybody wanting to have fun, but from a film standpoint, from a Freddie Mercury story, I didn't learn really anything about him. And I feel like it's a missed opportunity for that. So when people look at Bohemian Rhapsody and ask why did they love it, very rarely is it about the filmmaking itself. It's about the music. And the music was already fun and was already energetic, and we didn't need a 2-hour movie to validate that. And so that's really why I think this idea of dichotomy and contrast, what I went into either expecting or hoping to get out of the movie, it was really not met. And if other people, that's not what they were looking for, I get it. but this idea of dichotomy and the contrast of Freddie Mercury's public or stage life and persona versus what we know or what we assume about his private life, the fact that that wasn't really navigated or intertwined well, I think speaks to why I left the film very cold and immensely disappointing. But I know that's not for everyone, and so if you found Bohemian Rhapsody to be charming and uplifting and fulfilling as a cinematic experience, I want to hear you debate me. In fact, when we talked about this on the Shrink Tank podcast, we had one of our lovely followers really write a very lengthy piece of why she loved this film, even after she heard me really eviscerate it and break it apart. And I don't mind that. Tell me why you love Bohemian Rhapsody. Tell me where my psychology or my film criticism is off. But if you also left the film dissatisfied or disappointed, I want to hear from you as well. What was it about this movie that didn't strike the chord in the way that Queen's music does for you? That's going to do it for this episode of Psych Cinema. Be sure to comment below, and you can also leave a recommendation of a film you would like for me to discuss here on Psych Cinema. You can follow me on Twitter, and be sure to check out shrinktank.com. That's where you're going to find videos, articles, polls, and more that explore the intersection of pop culture and psychology. You can find my article there of why I hated 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. And if you check out the Shrink Tank podcast, you will find our panel of shrinks talking about Bohemian Rhapsody. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Psych Cinema. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again at the movies.